Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. John Schmeelk back with you. We welcome in Steve Palazzolo with the 33rd team. Steve, it was fun catching up with you with the Combine, man. Hope all is well.
Yeah, thanks, John. Always great catching up with you and all the other friends, my Twitter friends and everybody at the Combine. Always a fun week.
All right, so the folks that maybe haven't followed you closely since you left PFF, tell them where you can find you and all your content.
Yeah, my podcast partner, Sam Monson, and I, we left PFF in August, joined 33rd Team, and started our own podcast called Check the Mic. So that's anywhere you find your podcasts, any of the audio streams, and then on YouTube, where we're continuing to grow there. So Check the Mic podcast, basically the same thing we were doing for the last 10 years over at PFF, just under a new name.
All right, so we see a lot of football stuff at the Combine, workouts. We listen to a lot of future NFL players talk at the Combine, but maybe the most fun is talking to people around the league and kind of getting a feel for what they're thinking, what's going on. What was your main takeaway walking out of Indianapolis? Maybe something that you know now that you didn't know before you got there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked to a lot of people that love Travis Hunter as a wide receiver and, they don't hate him as a corner, but the number of people that in maybe a questionable wide receiver class might have him as the top wide receiver in this class. I think that's interesting for the Hunter evaluation, where I think most of us said, hey, he's a corner first, and it's easier to play full-time corner and then play 20 to 25 snaps of receiver. But especially the way some of the needs are, at the top of the draft and the teams that might draft a Travis Hunter, he might play more receiver than corner early on. Again, he wants to do both. But I thought that was interesting. And then the same buzz that everyone else is hearing about the Giants. And some of this, I think, is just, the assumption, right? They're probably the most QB desperate team. We know that they were close on Matthew Stafford, so that they're the most likely team to trade up for Cam Ward. I think I kind of assumed that going in, and that was, confirmed, I think, throughout the week that there's a potential move there from number 3.
All right, 2 follow-ups. One, for the people that say Hunter wide receiver more than corner, what was their plan for using him as a part-time corner? Because I don't think we've ever seen a guy be a part-time corner before.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was so much they had a specific plan on how they would use him. It was more like when I put up, or, them saying, when they put up Travis Hunter next to Tedero McMillan, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, that they just like Travis Hunter better. And again, my podcast partner, Sam Monson, said, watching him, his takeaway was that he looked gassed, right? Not surprising. Guys playing 140 snaps.
I thought so too.
Right. And he looks tired. And it's like, man, if he's 100%, feeling pretty good at receiver with those ball skills, the route running, the movement skills, maybe that's his best role. So, the other thing is I think all the creativity that you have with him as a player, not only playing both ways, but doing, adding flexibility to your depth chart. Maybe he's receiver 2 1 year, but the next year he's receiver 3 and he's a full-time corner. Maybe it depends on what you already have on your team. Maybe if he's not a great receiver, he converts to full-time corner after 2 or 3 years. There's so many of those what ifs here because he is so talented, and the fact that he can legitimately play 2 NFL positions. We haven't seen much like that. So it adds a lot of flexibility, I think, to his projection.
Yeah, I love the idea where he fails at one, you can put him at the other. So you almost get like 2 bites of an apple with one player, which to me is nice. What was your feel for what you're thinking Tennessee might do at number 1? Talking to people, I'm convinced the Browns, if they can, will pick a quarterback. But what do you think the Titans are going to do, and how do you think they're approaching this at number 1?
I think they're still torn on it. I think they have the same exact look. It's funny when reports come out and everything, because teams have to have literally every conversation. So if the report is, hey, team's considering this or that, yes, it's true. They should consider everything. And so they're sitting there saying Cam Ward, probably the clear top wide receiver QB. They only have one pick. One pick in the 30s and then not again until 101 or 102, right? So that's going through their minds. They're picturing the haul that they can get, say, from the Giants to move from 3 to 1. And before you know it, they have 5 picks in the top 100. They have a future 1. And I know they want to think long term. So they're having those debates. And I feel that they're still having those debates. I know, Chad Brinker, who's got a Packers background and wants to, as he said, draft 30 times over a 3-year period as like a rough goal, right? And they're not in position to do that. So he's got a chance to really reset the future here for the Titans. But you also, how many times do you get to, pick your quarterback, the top quarterback in the draft class? So I don't have a sense for where they're leaning. But I have a sense that they're having the same debates that we all are, as far as what they should do.
Yeah, I'm with you. I talked to someone that covered the Titans, and they said that whole can't pass on generational talent quote was maybe taken a little bit out of context, and it's more to your point. Try to make as many picks as you can in the top 100 every year, and try to get
Yeah.
as many bites as you can. And I think it's interesting, Steve, because you're right. I don't think the Titans know what they're doing, which means they're not going to move that pick before free agency starts next week. So the Giants have to go into free agency now probably approaching it like we don't know if we're going to be able to get a quarterback with our first round pick. They might all be gone. If Shore goes 2, Cam Ward goes 1, you might have no one left to pick at 3, which means you don't want to start a second or third round quarterback in year 1. That's not going to go well for anybody. So what do you think their approach should be now with Stafford off the board with the veteran quarterback market in free agency next week?
Man, I hate these difficult questions, John. I hate these things. This is why I can't be an NFL GM, because if you're stuck without a quarterback, it is challenging times. I'll be interested.
Bad year to be in this predicament, by the way. This is not the year to be needing a quarterback.
It is, and by the way, I've been workshopping a take that you can't really judge a general manager by his quarterback decisions. That I would actually look at everything else, because I think the quarterback thing, it's a lot of process, procedure, and luck, and the impact that it has is just uneven with the level of decision that you're making. But that's a whole different story. So don't envy the position that the Giants are in right now. But I think they have to look at the veterans. They have to look at that. I mean, part of this is I like to make my decisions for the long-term betterment of the team. And that's where things get tricky, right? Because if you're Joe Schoen and you're Brian Daboll, you're heading into year 4, and can you do that, right? Can you literally say, hey, we might not solve this year? Because that's the reality, is they might not be able to solve this year, right? There's a scenario where they don't get one of the top 2 quarterbacks, as you mentioned. There's a scenario where they have to pay Sam Darnold $40 million a year, and that's your best option. And any option besides that is a bridge quarterback. And you just kind of hope that maybe the bridge quarterback is as good as Sam Darnold was as a bridge. Or you play this game of let's trade for a Joe Milton because he looked so good, and you see if you can trade a 3rd round pick for him. I mean, those are the options, right? Those are the types of things that you're looking at, right? You bring in a 2nd or 3rd round quarterback. You trade for a backup that you think might have some upside. That's not appealing. It's not great. It's not exciting, right? So in free agency, I think you have to kick the tires on all the veterans, but like Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers aren't solving anything long term, and just putting a Band-Aid on it just so you're competitive in the 4th year of your regime doesn't feel like a great long-term strategy for the Giants. So from a long-term perspective, I wouldn't want to do that. But if you're Joe Schoen and you're just trying to show signs of life, Aaron Rodgers coming in playing under a Brian Daboll maybe is appealing, and maybe you can actually, win 9 or 10 games and start to show an upward trajectory.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
And by the way, that shouldn't then affect what you do in the draft, right? You should still attack that quarterback as much as you can in the draft. And I'll say this too, like I don't just think it's a Dable and Joe Schoen thing. Like the Giants almost became the first team in NFL history to go 0-9 at home last year. And every one of those losses just tears John Mara's guts out. Like I see him walking out of that box, and he hates losing and watching them lose. And I don't know if you looked at the Giants' home schedule this year, Steve, but it is a tinderbox. Like the worst, like they play the same team on the NFC West with the same record based on the schedule setup. Well, this year, that's the San Francisco 49ers. So that was supposed to be like the easy game that they had coming in to MetLife. So it's really tough. They have the Chargers, they have the Vikings, they have the 3 teams in the division, they have the Chiefs, the Packers. It's bad. So I think it's not just the timeline of the regime. I do think there's some of ownership just like, we just can't keep winning 3 or 4 games a year. At some point, you have to try to win a couple here.
Yeah. And honestly, that's the challenge for Schoen, right? I mean, you could say, hey, I mean, I've heard conflicting reports on what people think the impact is for last year's draft class, but I thought there were signs of life for last year's class, obviously, with Malik Neighbors and Tyrone Tracy. I think Theo Johnson's going to be all right. Tyler Nubin, starting. So, I mean, you could say, hey, look, Are a lot of the good veterans gone from a few years ago? Yes, but we could say, hey, there's an influx of youth over the last couple of years. Things are pointed in the right direction. You're not seeing it on the field yet. We got to figure out quarterback. It does feel like a reset, but again, it's if you look at the roster now versus 3 years ago, is it better? I don't know, right? So it's a challenging spot because I thought they should have rebuilt a few years ago and not tried to, it essentially pushed this day back, right? That when they made the playoffs in 22, didn't reset heading into 23 and, having some honest conversations about where the roster was and they're overachieving in 2022. I think it set the rebuild back, right? And if you look at, like, if last year was the first year of Shane and Daboll and the first year that they had struggled from an ownership perspective, you could stomach a longer term plan. And it's like, you are where you are. You have to stomach a longer term plan because, oh, by the way, the Eagles are really good. Washington's on the way up. Dallas is still has a really good nucleus. Like, you can't turn this around in a season. It's challenging to turn it around in a season unless you do what Washington did. Unless you get the right guy and he's that good, maybe you can, but it's challenging. You have to. To me, you almost have to think about 2026, and it's just the timeline's just not great given all the moving pieces over the last couple of years.
Yeah, all in all, and I guess we can wrap up this part of the conversation like this. Having Brian Daboll coach the hell out of that team 3 years ago and catching some luck in close games, all in all, that really was like one of the worst things that could have happened in terms of building long term. And Joe Shane even said at his press conference, look, we won those games. You don't just want to throw everything away after your organization wins their first playoff game since 2011. And you try to build off of that a little bit. And he even said, look, we made some mistakes coming off that year. So it's funny. Sometimes winning off schedule actually hurts your timeline a little bit because it makes you make decisions maybe you wouldn't otherwise make. That's
it. I always say, I think the toughest conversations organizations have to have is just honesty in the offseason, right? Either, if you could be a 4-win team that actually has a really good nucleus and maybe it sounds like you're just overly positive and say, no, keep, stay the course. Even though we won 4, stay the course, right? The Lions a couple of years ago, I mean, Dan Campbell had one of the worst winning percentages of all time where, I heard this from someone in the league this week where it was like, hey, if ownership was impatient with Dan Campbell a year and a half into it, we never would see how good the Lions could be here potentially. And they stood the course. They saw the process. And obviously the rest is history. The Lions are one of the best teams in the league. Conversely, you have an 11-win season with all the close games and everything. Can you honestly say, wow, we're really a 6-win team? We were really a 6-win team. We should treat the offseason as such and rebuild. It is a challenge for teams, I think, to have those honest conversations.
Yeah, and especially, with the fan base, with ownership, season ticket holders, they just went through this great year. And then, all right, we're going to get rid of the quarterback, the running back, and just rebuild from scratch. It's very, very, very difficult. Giants Huddle Podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. All right, Steve, we kind of touched on free agency, so why don't we hit that first, and then we'll hit your combine takeaways. I love getting your take on the prospect. They're always very unique, and I think you take it from an interesting perspective. But free agency, this is not a great class. We're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. We just saw Osa Digizua sign a long-term deal with the Cowboys. Trey Smith's going to get franchised. T. Higgins is going to get franchised. Looks like Sam Darnold's going to be out there in some way, shape, or form. Saquon Barkley just signed a massive extension with the Eagles. And I think people are like, they bought Saquon on the cheap. Great job by Howard using the market. Now I wonder if maybe has it flipped the other way? Has he now raised the market too high with another 2 years on that deal? So I'm curious to see how that all works out.
The Saquon raise, I mean, that reminds me of Christian McCaffrey. I mean, the Niners just kind of like, all right, we're just going to pay you a lot more money with no competition. They just paid McCaffrey and then he got hurt the next year. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but yeah, the Eagles rewarded Saquon. And look, I think you've got that extra cachet with the Super Bowl. And, I don't think the Eagles make that move a year ago, but they're in a unique spot where they just won and they understand I think what Saquon brings to the table for them. I'd like to go on record and say the Giants didn't do they did the right thing, letting Saquon walk, right? I mean, they did the right thing.
Both those things can be true at the same time, by the way.
Yeah, of course they are. I mean, he averaged 3, they're, as much as people want to say, oh, elite running backs matter, they matter. And you're hearing more and more of this. It's like, yeah, he was averaging 3.9 yards per carry the year that the Giants let him walk into free agency. It was the right move. All of a sudden, he's averaging 2 more yards per carry with the Eagles. What changed? Saquon was always a dynamic runner where if you gave him a little bit of a crease, he could take it to the house. Well, the Eagles gave him creases. And that's not to take anything away from him, but yeah, he was the cherry on top of a really good foundation of an offense. And we know that the Giants haven't had that foundation this entire time. Even Daniel Jones, if you really want to be a Daniel Jones apologist and say, which year did they have a really good offensive line? I don't think he really got that true opportunity with the line and with pass catchers. So the situation was much better for Saquon. But yeah, free agency wise, it isn't a great class. Darnold will be a big domino to fall. We'll see. I think there's a lot of teams around the league that have the chance to do what I was saying the Giants could do, which is the reset. Now, the Giants, they're in a different part of their lifespan with their front office, but the Jets with a new regime, the Raiders with their new regime, do they go and decide to get their quarterback and say, yeah, it's Sam Darnold, and then we'll draft and build around him? Or are they willing to punt on this season? You can't do that officially, but you got to air quote it. So we'll see what happens, because there's a lot of teams I think have a great chance, Titans too, to just reset and look to 2026 or beyond. But we always know there'll be some team that, opens up the checkbook here in free agency.
Yeah, talking to the Raiders people and people that cover them, there doesn't seem to be any indication that they're willing to take a long-term view and be patient here with like a 75-year-old head coach. So yeah. I imagine they're going to be pretty aggressive. And it's funny with the Saquon thing too. Just look at his average yards per carry before contact with the Eagles, and then look at it with the Giants, and that kind of explains the whole deal. To be totally honest with you. All right. Let's look at some of these positions. Weird wide receiver class. You get a bunch of like 29 to 31 or 32-year-olds, which is dangerous territory for wide receivers, especially when a lot of them are coming off of injuries, which makes it doubly dangerous. How do you think this wide receiver class is going to play out in free agency? Giants could be looking for a 2 across some neighbors.
Yeah, this is the problem with free agency. Sam Monson on our show keeps highlighting Darius Slayton as his, one of his favorite sleepers in this draft, right? In this free agent class. Because if he's like the 3, if he's just your deep threat, he's pretty good. Yeah. And so the Giants are losing him, right? So potentially. So it's a challenging class, because if you told me Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins just a year ago, I'd say, yeah, absolutely.
And Devontae Adams, by the way. Throw him in the mix too.
And Devontae Adams. And look, I think Adams can still play. But again, if you told me a year ago, DeAndre Hopkins on a contender, absolutely, go get him. Stephon Diggs with the Texans, I thought it was a great move to add him in.
And Keenan Allen, forgot about him.
Keenan Allen last year. But like all of these guys a year ago were very appealing. And a year later, it's like, did Amari Cooper really make an impact with the Bills? Did DeAndre Hopkins really make an impact with the Chiefs? Stephon Diggs got hurt. So it's a challenging class. And to your point, like when the receivers get up to a certain age, boom, in a year, all of a sudden they go from really appealing to not so appealing. And I think Chris Godwin is the interesting name for a lot of teams. He would fit the Giants, I think, in particular with what Malik Neighbors brings to the table. Godwin as a possession receiver, but he's coming off a bad injury, and his second bad injury in like 4 years here. So if you knew you were getting a healthy Chris Godwin, I think he's a nice complementary too. But this feels still like a draft and develop position, especially the way the college football has really sent a lot of receivers to the league over the last few years.
I actually like the cornerback class, Steve. I think it's pretty good. For zone and man corners, I think there are some players here. The Giants are in desperate need of a corner, and I think they're still young at that position as is. They could use a veteran, and this is not a great corner class in the draft anyway. Who are some of the corners in this class that you like? Again, some of these guys, too, are going to get into the 29, 30-year-old range, which gets dangerous. But a lot of them have had some really good years, too. So who are some of the corners that you think could get some good production per dollar, good bang for the buck when you look at this class?
So I'm absolutely with you as far as there's a lot of starting caliber corners out there. The actual free agent class, before you add Darius Slay and even James Bradbury getting released, Slay, I think, can still play. I think he'll be picky and, try to find a contender. Rumors that he wants to go back to Detroit, perhaps, to finish his career.
Well, I like that.
But the actual free agents, DJ Reed can play with the Jets. He was a nice pickup for them a couple of years ago, opposite Sauce Gardner. Travarius Ward, I think, is one of the better press man corners in the NFL. I think, again, he's going to be picky about where he wants to go. Rasul Douglas, I thought, was rejuvenated with Buffalo over the last year and a half, and more of a zone type corner for him. Byron Murphy could play inside, outside, has that flexibility. Carlton Davis III, I think he's still pretty good, again, coming off of injury, but he did a nice job for the Lions. Traded a third for him just to get the 1 year of service. Asante Samuel Jr. is the other really interesting one.
I like him.
Yeah. I mean, so you keep mentioning the 29 to 31-year-olds like they're all ancient, right? But in football terms, they are a little bit older, but very rarely, what's Asante, 26?
26, yep.
Every now and again, you get those second-round picks, solid career for 4 years, and they just hit free agency, and they're in their mid-20s, and they're in their prime.
And he's coming off an injury, too, which might lower the price a little bit.
Yeah, I like Samuel, again, ball hawk type, off coverage, zone type of player. So, yeah, I think there's plenty of starting corners available, and then when you add a Darius Slay to the mix, where all these other positions have a lot of scarcity that you're dealing with, I think there's a plethora of corners. So even slow play in the market, not overpaying for the top guys, I think there are starters to be had there.
Yeah, I think slow playing wide receivers, seeing which one of those veterans are left without a job in maybe beginning of April was not a bad way to go too. Guard's a spot. The Giants need a starting right guard. They need other things too, but they need a starting right guard. Don't love the group. When people have Will Freeze at the top of your group and they played like 3 games last year and it was a breakout year in like 3 or 4 games, that scares the hell out of me. I'm not going to lie. Tevin Jenkins, I think, is a good player, but he has trouble staying healthy. Your thoughts on this guard class overall, especially now that we know Trey Smith's not going to be there?
Tevin Jenkins is the guy I like the most, but I wish I had a diehard fan, enough of a diehard fan that followed me over the last 10 years that did like a montage of all the times I suggested to get injured players and how well it worked out. Because I imagine it's not great every year during free agency. Oh, I love this guy, but the injury. Yeah, if you forget about the injury concerns, and I know teams don't forget about injury concerns, right? We have more injury data, or at least they do internally more than ever. They could do a better job of projecting injuries, but those guys are always tempting for me, right? When it comes to free agency, I think about diversifying your portfolio. Not everybody can be safe. Sometimes you chase a higher upside type of player, and it's weird to say that a guard has high upside, but I would say that's where Tevin Jenkins is. He's got more of a track record than Will Freeze. I think he's got a comparable track record maybe to a Trey Smith, who's got the franchise tag from the Kansas City Chiefs. So I like Jenkins. Kevin Zeitler is every year you have one of those types of, hey, here's the 1 year guy. And again, the Giants are in a different spot, maybe from some other contenders where they're going to, the last piece of their offensive line puzzle, much like the Lions had last year, would be a Kevin Zeitler to bring in. So I don't know that he's necessarily a fit. Mekhi Becton scares me a little bit because of the injuries that he's had, right? 1 year at guard, that was pretty solid for Philadelphia. James Daniels, I think, is interesting. He got into the league real young, so he still has, I think, a little bit of time if you give him a 3-year deal, 2 or 3 year deal. So again, starters available. As far as the Giants go, still need to creep back toward average or just above average, right? I think they're moving in the right direction on the O-line, but second wave of free agency is usually a good place to get starters.
How about D-tackle and edge? This is a really good draft class in those 2 spots, and there's not a ton of stars at those spots. Milton Williams would be one of the highest paid guys. I'm sure Josh Sweat's going to get paid too. Khalil Mack's a little bit older. I think the Chargers, my understanding is that they're going to try to figure out a way to bring him back. But I wonder if teams are going to be a little hesitant to spend big up front on defense, given what this draft class looks like.
Yeah, I think a couple teams will spend at the top, like you're saying. I think some of the sleeper types that I like that played well, at least 2 years ago. You saw Malcolm Koonce for the Raiders play pretty well. He beat out Tyree Wilson, who was the first round pick that year, to be the guy opposite Max Crosby. So Koonce, I think, is pretty good off the edge. Maybe not necessarily a need for the Giants, but if they're thinking long-term, figure out what happens with Thibodeau. Not bad to have. Obviously, you could roll 3 and 4 deep at edge. You need to do that anyway. Levi Onwuzurike from the Lions is one of my favorites, especially when you look at the weakness that the Giants have next to Dexter Lawrence. I think he would fit extremely well. He dealt with some injuries for a few years and he's coming off his best year. If you can get 500 to 700 snaps of him next to Dexter Lawrence, I think he would be a great pickup. And again, I don't think he's going to be a $20 million a year player, probably more in the 10 range. We'll see what happens with the cap here. I think Onwuzurike would be extremely good value, especially for the Giants' needs.
All right, just anywhere else around this free agent class where you think you have a couple guys you love or you think could be of particular value for teams that are shopping maybe in that second or third wave of free agency?
Drew Dahlman at center. Again, I don't know what happened if it's too early to give up on John Michael Schmitz at center, but I don't know if the scheme fit's always been great. But Dahlman looks like one of the top centers in this draft. I like him as a player. I mentioned some of the other guards and defensive tackles that I like. Zach Bond is all of a sudden, a coveted free agent. It does sound like he's going to hit the market. And I'm always buyer beware for 1 year wonders and breakouts, but I thought he's always a talented player. Just, finally got his opportunity. And then again, it depends on the team, but Calais Campbell, if he wants to come back and play, he does want to play for a contender. He's at that point in his career where if you could bring him in for 1 year on the cheap, like other teams have, you get an extremely good value with Calais Campbell. So every year I feel like you have those veteran free agents that I really like that might only be a 1 year stopgap, but if all your other pieces are filled and that's just, hey, the last couple, Calais Campbell, and of course the great Morgan Moses, my favorite, the right tackle, that if any team has a right tackle need, that guy is a top 10 right tackle in the league, maybe top 8, top 5, and usually pretty durable and should be available.
All right, let's jump to the draft here, Steve. Let's start on the defensive front. I love the way you look at prospects. It's a little bit different, and you've had a lot of really nice hits over the years talking about them. Who are some of the defensive linemen and edge players in a really, really good class? They were good at the workouts. They're good on tape. They were good at the Senior Bowl. That you think maybe teams are a little too low on or maybe a little too high on?
It's a fascinating class because everybody has a yeah, but in their profile, right? I love this guy. Yeah, but this or that coming up. Like I think James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee has a great profile. Off-field stuff was being rumored quite a bit and discussed quite a bit at the combine for him. Same thing with Mike Green, the edge rusher from Marshall. I think production profile and what those guys can do off the edge is outstanding. Abdul Carter, of course, sitting at the top, but he's got 1 year playing on the edge. I think that's probably a positive for him because of the way he grew last year, converting from linebacker to the edge. So I like him still as a blue chip prospect. He's got the foot question, but that shouldn't be anything long term. So I think there's some really good, talented players who are productive. Then you have guys like the Michigan guys, Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams. Mykel Williams played through injury last year, super long. Looked like he was hobbled last year, said he was playing at only 60%. You could kind of feel that. So there's a bit of a projection there. Jalen Walker, never seen anybody that's really as inexperienced as he is because he played legit half linebacker and half edge at Georgia. And I think most would call him like a true 3-4 outside backer, old school style. But he hasn't rushed the passer a ton, has a ton of potential though. And then Shamar Stewart, I think, is that classic workout warrior who doesn't have the production. He's not awful on tape. He's good against the run and, just not a great pass rusher yet, but somebody's going to buy into those traits, I think, in the top 15. So I think there's plenty of talent in this draft, but like I said, they all come back with some sort of either off field or production question or position flexibility question that works either for or against them. I think once you try to sort them out.
Yeah, I think this group of day 2 edge players are interesting and how teams sort them. You got the Donovan Ezerakus, you got the Princely Umanmielen. I think he's interesting. You have the UCLA kid who I thought was great at the Senior Bowl, Oluwafemi Oladejo. He was really good down there. You could even throw in, some of the other smaller guys. Kyle Kennard, he had a really good college career. I think they'll be kind of a Nick Scarradin, depending on if you think he's a day 1 or day 2 guy. Josiah Stewart out of Michigan. Like, just day 2 guys that I think it's going to be tough to parse them. I think maybe it's scheme dependent. Do you want a bigger guy, a smaller guy? I think there's a nice group there too.
Really nice group. And I'm a Josiah Stewart fan. And that's the thing. Like, everybody that I'm a fan of on film, it's like, oh, he's too small and he's missing arm length.
He plays the run though. Stewart is tough as nails against the run, man. Whew.
Oh, I know. And it's interesting when you look at edge rushers and historic hit rates. It's usually one of those positions like offensive line or offensive tackle where you have to get them in the first. Hit rates in the first are so much better than on day 2. But I think in this class, because of the depth, there will be good value there, even despite some of the historical hit rates. I like Ashton Galati from Louisville as well.
Kind of a tweener.
Yeah, he is. But that's what I mean. I like, but I don't know. I like him. I like Josiah Stewart. Jared Ivey is an absolute monster for Ole Miss. And when you watch that entire defensive line with Walter Nolan, with Uman Mielen, who you mentioned, who I think has some great defensive pass rush specialist ability, remind me a little bit of Brian Burns, where I don't want him playing the run too much, but just let him get after the quarterback. So yeah, I'm with you, man. I think there's a lot of day 2. And my big thing this year, if you need defensive linemen, great year to double up first round, second round, or if you have 3 picks in the top 75, great way to come away with at least 2 on the defensive line in this draft.
So who are some of the day two defensive tackles you like? Because the Giants, if they skip that in free agency, they use their resources elsewhere, and they're looking for someone to put next to Dex long term. Who are some of those kind of three tech types that you'd like in that spot?
Yeah, Darius Alexander from Toledo. I think he's still a day two guy, but he's getting some round one hype. We'll see what happens with that. Like Braden Fisk almost went in the first round last year, and I think most people weren't expecting him to get that high. TJ Sanders is interesting, different style. He's a more undersized penetrator. I mean, it is which flavor do you like? You've got Alfred Collins from Texas, who's 330 pounds. He's bigger and taller. I don't think he's a hold the point guy, but I think he could penetrate and be really disruptive. I know there was an injury concern with Omar Norman Lott, the defensive tackle out of Tennessee. If he's healthy, though, I think he's a potential steal as long as the knee injury isn't long term. So another group, I think day two is fantastic as far as defensive tackles go and a lot of the depth in this class.
Yeah, on the other hand, and this is why I mentioned maybe attacking this in free agency, I do not love the day two defensive back class in this group, Steve. I have trouble finding guys that I really like. A couple of them are just slot only guys, which the Giants don't need because they got Drew Phillips, who's done a nice job in that spot. Any outside corners on day two that you think could make something of themselves here?
Yeah, so I think, this is where I would disagree a little bit. I think there are some good options. And so part of that is because I think there's guys like Shavon Ravel, Benjamin Morrison. I know Will Johnson's going to go in the first round, but Morrison and Ravel in particular were talked about going in the top 15. And then they got hurt, and now consensus board has them on day two in the 30s. If that's point.
True. If your medical staff clears those guys, they could be good second round players. I'm with you.
So I think some of those guys could fall. I've been a Trey Amos fan out of Ole Miss. I've been a fan of his since he was back at Louisiana. He went Louisiana, Alabama, Ole Miss, and I think he could play a little bit. Darian Porter just had the freak combine, but he's 24 years old, so some what ifs there, but size and movement skills are outstanding. And then I think it tapers off a little bit because I get what you're saying. Like once you get into Denzel Burke territory with Ohio State, he got torched in the first game against Oregon and was supposed to be a fringe first rounder and didn't really have that season. So I think there's a chunk of guys maybe in the round two, maybe they fall into round three range that are solid. And then I think there is a bit of a drop off there at corner.
No, I'm with you on that. If you got some of those guys dropping down to the top round two, I'm with you. I think you could get some value there.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does.
Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
Dude, this is the best running back class I've ever seen. I followed the draft closely probably for 8 to 10 years. And my goodness, everyone ran a 4.4. Not that I think top speed is super important for running backs, but you just watch the tape. There's so many good players that can fit different roles. You got guys of every flavor, size, bell cows, third down backs, bruisers. There's something for everyone in this running back class. It's so much fun. Who are some of your favorites?
Yeah, there really is. I mean, I think there's going to be a run in round two, right? So it is. I think a lot of people love this draft. Picks 15 through 75. So I think we'll see a running back run. Obviously, Ashton Genty's fantastic at the top. I got to go back on a Marion Hampton from UNC. He's getting all the buzz as the next first rounder. I didn't love his vision, but I think as a zone runner could be good, and he's got the big playability. I was surprised with how good Travion Henderson was from Ohio State, or just how I felt he was. I thought he was more just big play, take it to the house guy, but I was impressed with just how well he just stayed on schedule, and then broke it when he needed to. I think he's just a really good, effective runner, could have a really nice career. I think beyond that, I am a Cam Scattaboo fan. I know he didn't run, almost had a 40-inch vertical. He feels like a 4.6, 4.7 guy. I don't care. The dude breaks tackles, gets it done, catches the ball out of the backfield, did it at a small school, carried Arizona State this year. So I think Scattaboo is going to be an absolute steal. And then even just today, I was rewatching Jaden Blue out of Texas, who I ran sub 4.4. And I think, stylistically, he's not going to be an every down back, but I love him catching the ball out of the backfield, wheel routes, Texas route, option routes. I think he adds a lot just as a pass catcher. So you're right. The depth is here at the running back position and a whole bunch of different types and styles, I think, for every single scheme.
I'll just say this, NFL, don't let Jim Harbaugh draft Cam Scatterbo in round 3, please.
Oh, man, could you imagine? He's
going to give that poor guy the ball 30 times a game.
He would love him. He would love him so much. Scatterbo, get him.
Oh, my God, he would absolutely love it. And then, guys, the Iowa kid didn't test great, but he's big. And And if you look, I was looking at this today. If you want an every down back, they kind of have to be 220 pounds. There are some exceptions. Kyron Williams is a little bit, he's 205, but he's only 5'9". So that kind of makes up for the lack of size a little bit. So there are enough of guys that fit that. You mentioned Hampton. Caleb Williams is in that. Caleb Johnson from Iowa is in that.
Johnson's good. I mean, he's so smooth. He's got that Arian Foster zone running style where he actually reminded me a little bit of Joe Mixon too, where he's just another maximize, break a few tackles when you need to. Johnson was very impressive despite the 4.55 40.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, again, and I think even like Bashal Tutin was awesome. Like that, and he's racked up too. Like you look at him at the podium, he's only two. I think he came in at like 207 or something like that. He's jacked though. Like he's like a thick dude, even though he's not that tall.
Yeah. Him and Scadaboo, both guys that were FCS guys, got the opportunity at bigger schools, came good. I think Tutin, had 5 fumbles last year, but big play threat. Virginia Tech tried to get him on the edge quite a bit. They knew what they had in him from a big play speed perspective, so he definitely brings that to the table.
And then like Kyle Munninguy and Devin Neal, they're boring, but they're good. Like they're just good. I just think it's a fun class. Any other groups really jump out at you, Steve, that you have guys that you're excited about?
I think safety has a little bit of depth there. Malachi Starks and Nick Emanwari at the top are interesting players. I don't know. I kept thinking Starks might get looked at as a corner with just his man coverage skills. I would consider that in the back of my head because I don't think he plays pure safety all that well. I know a lot of people like him,
right? You're using a slot,
maybe even outside. Like I'm that crazy with Starks. I think his ball. I think he's just better in man coverage than just seeing the game as a safety. But I know some people like him at free safety. Emanwari is going to be fantastic. I think Xavier Watts is a good player. Just a good, solid player. Maybe can cover some tight ends, right place at the right time type of guy. Andrew Makuba for Texas, I think is really good. Played well at Clemson and at Texas in his career. So I think safety's got a little bit of depth. It's an interesting year where I think depth's all the positions we talked about: deep defensive line, deep running back class, but it's weaker in the spots where last year there was tackle, there were QBs, receivers, tackles. It's just a different year where the strength has pivoted to all these different positions.
I do think it's a year though, if you need a guard, there's so many offensive tackles that measured with short arms and maybe don't have the physical ability to move on. Like, there's gonna be a ton of guards because there's a bunch of tackles that can't play tackle in the NFL.
I mean, Will Campbell for some teams is going to be off the board as a tackle just because of the arms. I think someone will try him. It depends on where he gets drafted. Kelvin Banks, there's a lot of rumors about him going to the Bears or the Niners. Like if the Niners take him at 11, I saw Niners fans saying they would love Kelvin Banks, play guard year 1, kick out to left tackle the next year. So all these guys can either play guard and then move to tackle, whatever it might be. So every single tackle has been discussed in the guard conversation, I think, except maybe Josh Simmons from Ohio State, but he's coming off of injury.
All right. Final 2 questions. What do you think about this quarterback class?
I think no hot takes really. I think it's what people think as well. I mean, it's Cam Ward. I think Shadur Sanders might be closer to the next tier than we've been talking about over the last couple of months. That
I just said today, I think Sanders might be closer to Dart than he is to Ward, to be honest.
Yeah. And that's the sense I get. I'm also, my cop out on this is like, I don't think anybody's good at quarterback evaluation. So I don't care what,
nobody
right?
knows.
I don't care what anybody says. And it's different than other positions, right? I care, what people say about other positions because the success is measured differently, right? And so I always joke, show me the guy that knew Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert, and Jaden Daniels. Show me the guy that stacked all that up and we'll trust him. So my opinion doesn't matter, but I'll give it anyway. I like taking shots on that second tier. It could be Dylan Gabriel, who's just too short, but really productive. It could be Quinn Ewers, who I think was on a good trajectory before he got hurt, and Sark really going to bat for him throughout this process, talking about what he battled through last year. Taking a shot on a Kyle McCord or Will Howard, whatever it might be. It's not appealing, but I think that second wave of QBs are interesting. Jalen Milroe, if they could figure it out. But yeah, it's deep in the backup developmental stage and not deep in the starter stage.
I think I'm leaning towards the I don't care about age for quarterback camp. But what do you think about Tyler Shuck, who is old?
Yeah.
He's going to be 26, but hasn't played a ton either because he's been hurt all the time.
Age matters. Like when I was playing minor league baseball and I was 24 in rookie ball and blowing dudes away. And it was like, that's good, Steve, but you're playing against 18 and 19-year-olds. and you're 24. You need to be at a higher level. So to me, if you're looking at a quarterback from like a data perspective and saying how well did this guy play, you have to adjust for competition. If you're just saying will this guy get better or is he going to age, like none of that matters, right? I mean, you're trying to get 10 years out of a quarterback. It doesn't matter. They're playing into their 30s and 40, 35 plus, and they're fine. So it depends on how you're using age. I don't think it matters a whole lot unless you're using statistical profiles and you have to say, okay, this dude's 24 playing, in the ACC, then it matters. But if you're trying to project him, I don't think it's a big deal at all.
I'm with you. Final question. Give me some Palazzolo sleepers here in this draft class. Maybe guys you haven't mentioned yet that you wonder why isn't the league higher on these guys, because I think they're really good.
I liked Ezeraku, who you mentioned, from BC. I think, we're talking as like a day 2 type of edge. I think he might be day 1. I already mentioned my guy Trey Amos at corner. CJ West, the defensive tackle out of Indiana, had a really good workout. I think he put himself on the map there. I think Jack Sawyer from Ohio State is going to get slept on in this class where there's, a whole bunch of freaky athletes and upside types. I think Sawyer's production is going to step up and just be is going to be really good. And Jaden Higgins is no longer a sleeper or like a my guy or anything. It's up to the point where we put him in a first round mock to the Buffalo Bills at the end of the first. I think Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, he's been one of my guys throughout this entire process. He's just going to keep rising though. So he's no longer, a sleeper. No. Jaden Higgins, big fan of him.
I think his teammate Jalen Noel's pretty good too. I
love both of them. Yeah. I mean, Noel's the guy. He reminds me the most of Ladd McConkey with the combination of speed and quicks.
I'm with you.
Right. Like when I watched McConkey run routes, I was like, whoa, I stopped and said, wow. And I think Noel has some of that ability where some guys are just fast, but they can't change directions. But I think both of those guys, McConkey and Noel, can do both.
Did you get confirmation on that? Because I've asked 3 different people, and they've told me it's Noel and Noel. Is it Noel?
I just flip back and forth between it.
And it wasn't in the pronunciation guide at the combine either. I looked, I was all excited. I'm like, it's still not there.
I rely, whenever the beast comes out, I'll go by Dane's pronunciation as the official. So I'll assume that Dane has it.
And I might text
him
the other day. Dane was on with Robert Mays, and he called him Noel. And I was going with Noel in Indy, and I switched back to Noel because I heard Dane call him that yesterday.
If Dane said Noel, I'm going with Noel. That's where I'm going because I have heard both along the way. So I'll go with Noel here.
All right, good. I'm happy I'm not the only one that was confused. And by the way, I talked to Ezeraku for like probably 8 minutes down at the Senior Bowl. Like, if that dude's like a CFO of a bank in 20 years, he is an unbelievable kid, super smart. So I'm with you. I think he might sneak into the first round.
Heard that from a lot of people. Knows what he's doing. Smart kid. Knows how to play football. So big fan of him. And if he's a day 2 type of guy, I think that's a steal in the second round.
Steve, tell the folks where they can find everything you're doing and anything they should keep an eye on coming up for you and Sam.
Yeah, our show's called Check the Mic. So if you're on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, search Check the Mic, MIC. All under the 33rd team, and we're in full offseason mode. My favorite, helping team build for every team, free agency, draft. We're talking all about it on Check the Mic.
Yeah, sadly for the Giants, this has been the fun part of the years, the last 2 or 3 years, and try to figure things out. That's the Giants Huddle podcast. Thank you to Steve Palazzolo. It's all brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. We'll see you next time, everybody.